The summer sun baked down on the school's annual end-of-year picnic, its heat making the scent of grilled burgers and sunscreen hang thick in the air. Laughter and chatter echoed across the park until a sudden crash of liquid and the sharp splatter of food cut through it all. Gasps rippled as bright red fruit punch cascaded over Lena Brooks's hair and white blouse dripping down her arms, followed by a cold, sticky mound of potato salad landing squarely in her lap. The three senior boys, who'd done it Trevor, Mason, and Kyle, stood smirking, their laughter loud enough for everyone to hear. But behind Lena's drenched lashes, there was the faintest glimmer in her eyes, not defeat, but something much colder. Lena, 24, had been the student teacher for Mr. Harkin's history class for the past semester. She had worked hard to earn the respect of the students, though her polite, soft-spoken demeanor had made her an easy target for the more unruly ones. Trevor and his friends had been pushing boundaries for weeks, whispers behind her back, mocking impressions, petty pranks. She'd brushed them off before, unwilling to cause a scene. But today was different. The humiliation wasn't just about her. The spill had happened right in the middle of the picnic's main lawn, in front of other teachers, parents, and dozens of students with their phones already out, recording every moment. Lena's blouse clung to her skin, the cold potato salad sliding down her skirt. The laughter was a wave that crashed over her, and for a second, she stood frozen, letting them think they had won. Her mind, however, was already sharpening like a blade. These boys thought they were untouchable, the kind who could hide behind charm in their football jerseys, who could make a mockery of someone and get away with it because no one wanted to overreact. What they didn't know was that Lena had spent years training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and amateur MMA. That training had taught her patience, timing, and the importance of making a statement at the right moment. Mr. Harkin started toward her, concern etched on his face, but Lena subtly shook her head, sending a drip of fruit punch rolling off her chin. "I'm fine," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. She gathered the paper napkins someone had handed her, dabbing at her blouse without urgency. The boys, still laughing, were already swaggering away toward the buffet tables, shoving each other and basking in their little victory. Lena's heartbeat slowed, her breathing steady. The sting of embarrassment was already cooling into focus. She scanned the lawn, kids tossing frisbees, parents chatting under canopies, the long line of folding tables laden with food. The perfect place for what she had in mind was already in view. She wasn't going to chase them down in anger. No, she was going to wait for them to come back like they always did. Across the grass, the boys glanced her way, again grinning. Trevor made a mock wiping motion at his shirt, earning another round of laughter from Mason and Kyle. They thought she'd skulk off somewhere to cry. Instead, Lena stayed in plain sight, positioning herself near the refreshments. She could feel curious eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. Her posture was relaxed, her expression unreadable, a calm surface over the quiet storm building underneath. She wasn't just going to reclaim her dignity. She was going to make sure that when this day was remembered, no one would talk about the humiliation without also talking about what came after. Lena stood beside the long refreshment table, casually folding used napkins into a neat stack, her damp clothes clinging uncomfortably in the warm breeze. The sugary scent of spilled punch clung to her skin, but her face betrayed no irritation. Every part of her was focused on one thing: the moment the boys would drift back into range. They were predictable. Trevor, Mason, and Kyle had always hunted in packs, their confidence swelling when they were together. She watched them from the corner of her eye as they wandered near the volleyball court, posturing for a group of girls. They gestured back toward Lena, chuckling, no doubt retelling their epic prank. The girls didn't seem impressed, and Trevor, frustrated, gave Lena another glance, like he couldn't resist poking at her again. She knew the look. Bullies like them always wanted the encore. Her mind flicked back briefly to her own high school years, to the older boys who used to shove her into lockers until she started taking self-defense classes. That first day, she'd stood her ground, they'd backed off. And in that moment, she'd learned something vital. You can't just tell people to respect you. You have to show them why they should. Now standing at the picnic, she was about to show them. Trevor finally made his way toward the refreshment area, Mason and Kyle following with lazy smirks. The crowd was thinner here, just a few parents spooning coleslaw onto paper plates and a cluster of students picking at brownies. The sun was bright overhead shadows, short every movement visible. Lena positioned herself at the corner of the table, adjusting a platter of watermelon slices so her hands were free. She wasn't going to throw the first insult, or even the first touch. She'd learned that letting them make the first move was the fastest way to turn the tables both figuratively and literally. Trevor leaned on the table across from her, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Need a towel, Miss Brooks? Or maybe a raincoat next time?" Mason snorted, shoving a paper plate toward her. "Here, catch some of this before it hits your shirt." He pretended to scoop a spoonful of baked beans, the motion exaggerated for the audience that was already starting to turn their heads toward the exchange. Kyle, always the quietest but most observant of the trio, scanned her face. "She's not even mad," he said with a smirk. "Guess she likes the attention." That was the trigger. Inside, Lena's muscles coiled, her weight shifting almost imperceptibly. The voices of her MMA coach echoed in her head. "Breathe. Stay grounded. Timing is everything." She counted the beats of her own pulse, feeling the tension in the table's steel frame under her fingertips. Trevor reached for a pitcher of lemonade, clearly planning to accidentally spill it across her chest. He never got the chance. In one smooth, decisive movement, Lena hooked her hands under the table's edge and drove upward, using her hips for power. The heavy folding table lurched off the ground, food and drinks launching skyward like a colorful explosion. Paper plates spun through the air. Watermelon wedges smacked the grass, and the massive cooler of lemonade tipped, dousing Trevor's shirt in a shockingly cold wave. The impact knocked Trevor back a step, and Mason stumbled sideways, slipping on a rogue hamburger patty. Kyle's eyes went wide as he scrambled to keep his footing. A stunned hush fell over the nearest spectators, the kind of silence that comes when no one quite believes what they've just seen. Lena straightened slowly, her expression calm, as if she'd merely adjusted the tablecloth. But in her eyes was the promise of more, and the boys could see it. Trevor's sneakers squelched against the grass as he tried to steady himself, lemonade dripping from his hair and running down his shirt in sticky rivulets. Mason was crouched low, both palms pressed to the ground, trying not to slip again. Kyle, wide-eyed, had one hand up, as if that alone could stop whatever was coming next. The entire food tent was frozen. Parents paused mid-bite, forks suspended, and students clutched their phones tighter, recording in silence. It wasn't just that Lena had flipped the table. It was how she had done it, without a word, without a flicker of hesitation. Trevor recovered his balance and tried to force a smirk. "Real mature Miss Brooks," he muttered, though his voice carried less bite now. But his pride was stinging, and she could see it in the way he stepped forward too close, his wet shirt clinging to his chest. "Careful," Lena said softly, her tone almost conversational. "You're already in over your head." That was all it took to set him off. He lunged, not with a punch that would have been too obvious, but with the same mock shove he'd used to jostle her in the hallways weeks earlier. Only this time, Lena was ready. She pivoted on the ball of her foot, catching his wrist mid-shove. Her grip was iron, twisting his arm into a joint lock so fluid it looked like muscle memory. Trevor's smirk dissolved into a startled grunt as his knees bent involuntarily. Mason, seeing his friend bent forward, surged toward her in a rush of bravado. Lena didn't let go of Trevor. Instead, she used his own weight to spin him sideways, forcing Mason to halt abruptly, or collide with him. That hesitation was all she needed. She stepped forward and swept Mason's ankle with the edge of her foot, sending him sprawling onto the grass with a muffled curse. The students gasped in unison. Phones now fully raised, a dozen camera lenses catching every movement. Kyle took a cautious step back, but Lena's gaze found him anyway. "Your turn," she asked evenly. He hesitated, glancing between his friends, then tried to salvage his ego by stepping forward half-heartedly. She sidestepped, hooked his elbow, and guided him down in a controlled takedown that looked almost gentle until he realized he was flat on his back, staring up at the blue sky, unable to move without her letting him. Trevor's arm was still locked. Mason was scrambling to his knees, and Kyle was blinking up at her in confusion. Around them, the picnic had transformed into an arena. Whispers, laughter, and muffled exclamations filling the space where only moments ago the boys had been kings. Lena released her grip, stepping back. "You've made your point," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Now I've made mine." The boys stayed low, unsure whether to rise or retreat. Every pair of eyes was on them, and the weight of that attention was heavier than anything Lena could have done physically. She knew this was the moment that would burn itself into their memories the day they learned that not everyone they picked on would stay down. And the picnic wasn't over yet. For a long, charged moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the generator powering the snow cone machine somewhere down the field. Trevor's jaw was tight, his pride bruised even more than his arm. Mason brushed grass off his shorts without looking anyone in the eye. Kyle stayed seated, hands braced behind him, still trying to catch his breath. Lena didn't crowd them. She stood tall, her shadow cutting across the trampled grass between them, her breathing slow and controlled. Her posture wasn't aggressive, but there was no mistaking the command in her presence. Around them, a ripple of voices began to rise, students whispering, a few bold enough to cheer, others murmuring in disbelief. Parents were watching too, some frowning in shock, others wearing the faintest smile. The line between scandal and satisfaction was thin, and Lena walked it perfectly. Trevor tried to salvage something of his dignity, straightening to his full height. "This isn't over," he muttered, too low for most to hear. "It is for today," Lena replied calmly, loud enough for the nearest dozen people to catch every word. "You've embarrassed yourself enough." The words hit harder than a shove. Mason's cheeks flushed as the students' whispers shifted to snickers. Kyle, still seated, muttered something under his breath and got to his feet, slowly brushing himself off. Mr. Harkins arrived just then, weaving through the crowd. His expression was a complicated mix of concern, confusion, and something like restrained amusement. "Miss Brooks," he began carefully, "is everything?" "It's handled," Lena said, her voice even. She didn't look away from the boys, making sure they heard every syllable. Trevor gave a humorless laugh. "You think you're tough because you took a couple swings?" Lena took a single step forward, closing the distance enough that only they could hear what came next. "No," she said. "I'm tough because I didn't lose control. And you should be grateful I didn't teach you the way my coach taught me." Trevor's smirk faltered. Mason glanced away. Kyle swallowed hard. The crowd didn't hear the exact words, but they saw the effect. Lena turned her back on them deliberately, as if they were no longer worth her time, and began resetting the table. She lifted toppled trays, salvaged unopened water bottles, and handed a parent the least damaged plate of cookies. The small, practical gestures contrasted sharply with the explosive moment they just witnessed, making it clear she wasn't some reckless hothead. She was in control from start to finish. The boys lingered, but the spell of their dominance was broken. Students were no longer avoiding Lena's gaze. They were watching her openly, some with admiration, some with awe. One girl near the drinks table whispered to her friend, I didn't know she could fight like that. Mr. Harkins bent slightly toward her as he helped reposition the cooler. I'll need to talk to you about this later, he said under his breath. I'm sure you will, Lena replied equally low, but her eyes were steady, unbothered. She knew she hadn't crossed the line. She'd defended herself, nothing more. Across the lawn, the boys finally moved off toward the bleachers, their swagger gone, their shirts stained, their hair still damp from the lemonade. They didn't look back. The crowd's attention began to scatter again, but Lena knew the story would travel fast, and she wasn't done teaching her lesson yet. The rest of the picnic moved on, but the air around Lena felt different now. Students who had barely acknowledged her before were sneaking glances, some offering hesitant smiles. A few even approached to ask if she needed help cleaning up, but she waved them off politely. She preferred to finish this herself. It was her battlefield, and she was going to leave it on her own terms. Trevor Mason and Kyle stayed huddled at the far end of the bleachers, their postures slouched, sneakers tapping anxiously against the metal. Every so often, Trevor's gaze would flick toward her, but the moment she looked his way, he turned away sharply. His face was still flushed, and it wasn't from the sun. Lena worked deliberately, stacking the folding tables back into place. She wasn't rushing, but every movement had a finality to it, the quiet aftermath of a storm. She could feel the murmur of conversations around her, snippets carrying just enough for her to hear. Did you see her flip that table? They had it coming. Wish I could have recorded the whole thing. Principal Harris eventually made his way over his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He glanced toward the boys, then back at Lena. I'll be speaking to them, he said simply, and I'll have a word with you too. But between us, his voice lowered slightly. They needed to be taken down a peg. Just keep it professional from here. Lena gave a small nod. Understood. She didn't need the principal's approval. She hadn't done it for him or even for the students watching. She'd done it because she refused to let that moment, the humiliation, the laughter, the sting of cold punch down her back, become the lasting image anyone had of her. As the afternoon wound down and families began packing up, Lena crossed the field toward the parking lot. The late sun cast long shadows, and the smell of charcoal and grass hung in the air. She passed the bleachers without slowing, though she knew the boys were watching her. Just before she reached the edge of the lot, she stopped, turned. They were still sitting there silent, their earlier bravado gone. Lena met Trevor's eyes, first holding them just long enough for him to shift uncomfortably. Next time, you think about embarrassing someone for fun, she called across the distance. Remember how quickly things can turn. No shouting, no threats, just a clear, unshakable truth delivered for all three to hear. Trevor didn't answer. Mason stared at the ground. Kyle gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. Lena turned again and walked away, her stride steady, shoulders back. She didn't need an apology from them. The change in their posture was enough. By Monday, the story would have been told a dozen different ways, each one ending with the same image the moment the student teacher stopped being the quiet target and became the one person they didn't dare mess with again. Her car door shut with a satisfying click. As she started the engine, she caught her own reflection in the rearview mirror, damp hair, streaks of punch on her shirt, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't just defended herself. She'd earned something more valuable, their respect, and the knowledge that no one there would see her the same way again. Humiliation can be a powerful weapon in the hands of a bully, but only if the target accepts it. Lena's stand at the picnic was more than self-defense. It was a reminder that respect isn't given freely. It's claimed through action. By refusing to retaliate in blind anger, she demonstrated control skill and dignity under pressure. Bullies thrive on fear and silence. But when confronted with calm strength, they lose the power they think they hold. The lesson is simple. Sometimes the most important battles are not about winning or losing, but about refusing to be defined by someone else's cruelty.